Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We have fabulous friend of the show, Michael Brooks. He's actually got a new book out. He's going to talk about that. Should be interesting. Zach Carter is on to talk about the many ways in which American government is failing the test of the coronavirus crisis. And we also have Alex Lawson on to talk about Medicare for all. But in the midst of everything, Saagar, there's a primary scheduled for next week.
Oh, yes.
In Wisconsin. And as of now, they're planning insanely on moving forward with it.
Yeah, it's an absolutely mystifying circumstance. Senator Bernie Sanders put out a statement basically urging people urging that the state push back the date for the polls.
Which should be obvious to everyone.
It seems obvious, especially after we covered this. Florida poll workers, I think 4 poll workers who have come down and contracted coronavirus, and then they have to go out and warn everybody who came into contact with that person showing no symptoms on the day of the election and breaking out with coronavirus exactly 6 days after, which is the incubation period, meaning, sadly, that they likely contracted the virus while they were there. That's not to mention the innumerable number of untested cases that might have resulted from holding these elections. And yet, there's one candidate in the race who says, well, hold on a second. If Wisconsin wants to vote in person, then that's all good. And that's former Vice President Joe Biden. He said it yesterday during a Q&A with the press. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Mr. Vice President. So my question is about the Wisconsin primary and whether you think it's still appropriate to have in-person voting there, considering the fact that the Democratic National Convention has been pushed back, and public health officials say it's important to stay home at this time.
Well, the answer is I listen to the scientists. A convention having tens of thousands of people in one arena is very different than having people walk into a polling booth with accurate spacing to 6 to 10 feet apart, one at a time, going in and have machines scrubbed down. But I do think there are going to be a lot more. I think you could hold the election as well, dealing with mail-in ballots and same-day registration. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. That's for the Wisconsin courts and folks to decide. But I think it's possible to do both, to have both more mail-in ballots. People, and today is the last day, it gets till 5 o'clock to ask for one. There's an hour time difference from where I am in Wisconsin. And I think it could be done based on what I've been hearing from the news and what I understand the governor and others are saying. But that's for them to decide.
Unconscionable.
That's fair.
That answer at this time. I mean, literally, people could die from going out and in-person voting right now. And sure, in an ideal world, everybody's spaces apart and they wipe down the machines and all. But we saw how this happened.
In Florida.
We saw how it went down in Florida and Arizona and Illinois, where you had people packed into spaces. You had poll workers who didn't show up. You had other poll workers who didn't have sanitary wipes. They didn't have the hand sanitizer that they wanted. They weren't able to protect themselves and protect voters, which is why we saw some of those poll workers come down with coronavirus. And sure, technically, is it the governor and the court's decision? Yes, but you are a leader. You're a leader. You're supposed to be taking a moral stance here. And this is a no-brainer at this point. It is. Here's the other thing. You know, he's been very critical of President Trump. We've been critical of President Trump here. There are things to criticize. You lose all ability to be critical of him having a slow response when you are still urging people against the guidance of health experts to go to the polls. It is unconscionable.
You know, it is unconscionable. It's reckless. And it really just shows he's like, well, you know, if they're going to let him go, then I'll tell my people to go because I'd rather win the election, wrap this thing up, get Bernie out of the race. I think it's terrible. And you see that through so much of his answers where he has this like moral preening towards President Trump. I sat through that live stream, by the way. I wanted to, you know, it was terrible. Along with 1,800 other people on Twitter.
Oh, wow. And how many of them were in the press?
Yeah, how many of them were in the press? So I'm sitting through this thing, and every single time I had this observation. He has no plan that is not currently being enacted. It's all like, well, we need to speed up the delivery of places where there are shortages. We need to speed up the use of the Defense Production Act. Or it's all process critique. It's all like, he should declare this and move things around. And that's what I would do. Vague as hell. There's literally, it doesn't mean anything. But second, it's just completely void of anything forward thinking. There's no new vision. There's no, like, if I come in, these are the radical different steps that I would take. And I think that's how people are feeling right now. I mean, think about it. 10 million unemployment claims. The New York Times came out today and estimates the unemployment rate at 13.1%, the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression.
Wow.
And it's only going to go up next week when all of this continues. And let's consider this. Joe Biden is encouraging people to go to polls on April 7th. That is at the exact forecast that the government says will be the height of coronavirus deaths and transmission in the United States.
Wow.
That only makes it even more unconscionable because it's not right now or even a couple of weeks ago. Now it's a full-blown pandemic outbreak all across the country. Neighboring Michigan is going through hell right now.
Right.
I mean,
Detroit's in a bad place.
Detroit is in a very bad place.
Yeah.
And yet, he's continuing to let people go to the polls.
It's truly
or encourage
unbelievable.
people to go to the polls.
Right. It's truly unbelievable. And what's the drumbeat coming out from the Democratic establishment? Oh, Bernie Sanders is selfish, right? It's irresponsible for him to stay in the race. He's not the one urging people to risk their lives to go out and in-person vote. And you'll recall before the last round of primaries, which also should not have gone forward at that point, the results of which, the ramifications of which we are seeing now, his team, he was putting out health misinformation saying, if you don't have symptoms, fine for you to go out. We know that's not the case.
That happened to a poll worker.
We know
and
that's
just
not
one
the
is
case.
enough to say that this wasn't worth it. Yeah.
I mean, the governor of Georgia is getting, rightfully so, a lot of hell right now for saying he didn't know that asymptomatic carriers were a thing, when anyone who's been watching any news coverage has known that's a thing for a long time. But how is Joe Biden any better? When they're putting out that same information and they're saying, hey, if you feel good, get out there, go to the polls, go vote for me. You're already ahead, dude. You don't need to do this. Like, just make the right call and put the pressure. He's in a position of power and leadership. And if he forcefully said we need to move these things, it could have an impact, and it would at least discourage his voters from going out and in-person voting. I honestly can't even believe that they're still taking this position.
And yet, I mean, it's not that unbelievable because from the very beginning, he has been highly cynical about this entire voting process. Whenever he was way behind, fifth in the race and in the polls, ahead of South Carolina, he was asked on that stage, along with all the other Democratic candidates. He's like, let the process play out. Not necessarily should the person who gets the most delegates, despite not having an absolute majority, can come into the convention and be the nominee. Then the moment after the tables turn and he's on top, him and his campaign, I think we've had enough debates. Jim Clyburn, before the last debate, was clamoring in order to get that debate canceled and have Bernie drop out of the race. So much of what they've been doing is just vote posturing, encouraging people to go out to the polls because they just want to rack it up and secure their delegate position. And again, I say, for what? Because there's no concrete position that is being advocated for. I sat through that press briefing. His plan is literally just to do the Trump plan and supposedly do it better. And it's like, okay, I mean, is that an inspiring message to millions? No, and I think that's why millions don't tune in to hear anything he has to say. By adopting that position, he's basically irrelevant to the entire discussion. So why should any cable news producer include a clip of him saying, I'll do what Trump is doing, but better? He's not even really that critical of the Trump administration. He basically seems to agree with much of what they're doing. It's all just like, I'll get things there faster, and we need more ventilators. Like, everybody knows we need more ventilators. That's not like that's not a revolutionary position. Just the whole thing is ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's why there was a poll out this week testing Trump, who you trusted more to handle the coronavirus crisis, Trump versus Biden. It was close, but Trump had the edge. I mean, at a time when, his late reaction and his misinformation came in for very heavy, justified criticism and scrutiny, that you, standing on the outside, I mean, Joe Biden doesn't have to do one thing. He can just be on the outside, coming up with plans, leveling critiques, etc. He's the guy who they basically put in position to win the Democratic primary, not only because they believed that he could beat Donald Trump, but he had that commander-in-chief, they've seen him in the Situation Room. And even that low bar of standing on the outside and taking shots, he's not able to meet. People are trusting. Wrap your head around this. Like, from a Democratic perspective, people are trusting Donald Trump more than Joe Biden on coronavirus right now. That should be enough for Democrats to realize what a mistake they've made by throwing in with this guy.
And that is going to be the whole election. That's the whole ball game. Life is not going back to normal until November. It's no longer just the economy. I mean, the economy is part of it, but it's much going to be about stewardship out of this crisis. And it will be basically an up or down referendum on Trump and his handling of this crisis. And so far, if he's leading, that's generally how it's going to be. And as I remind everybody, this country reelected George W. Bush after he invaded Iraq because they were like, you know what? We trust W to get himself out of the mess more than we trust John Kerry, who has so many different similarities with Joe Biden, even more so the fact that he is his major campaign surrogate.
Right. And you have Andrew Cuomo out there who, as you all know, I'm not a big fan of, but he does the command and control presentation very well. And so that contrast also with Joe Biden makes Joe look small, makes him look ineffectual. And I think that's exactly part of why people are preferring Andrew Cuomo. A lot of Democrats are having some buyer's remorse, wishing that they could, switch out their candidates, switch out their horses, which I don't know if that's possible. But there's no doubt that those sort of conversations and fantasies are happening right now.
What a strange time.
Indeed. We're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.